This is gonna sound silly, man, but or actually it's not. I would tell him, to stay the hell away from like the party scene. Anything you put in front of your goal, and especially something like that, whether it's too much gambling, too much food, too much cold beers on the weekend, anything you put in front of the prize, so to speak, it's gonna end up getting in the way and hurting you in the end. Unfortunately, not many people are lucky enough to traverse through things like that and come out on the other side, And a lot of people don't make it. They don't live through it.
Apt Pupil is a solid movie and a decent adaptation of the original King story. But on top of that, Apt Pupil is a film which, behind the scenes, and perhaps unbeknownst to those involved in the making of the film, featured two of Hollywood's most tragic cliches: the ill-fated child star and the allegedly abusive industry filmmaker. Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. This is the fourth video in the Different Seasons series in which I will be discussing the feature-length film adaptation of Apt Pupil. Apt Pupil was based on the story of the same name from the collection of novellas Different Seasons, which was published in 1982, and while the subject matter tackled within the film is indeed dark, the stories surrounding two of the individuals who made the film, actor Brad Renfro and director Bryan Singer, are fairly heavy as well. But before we get into all of that, I suppose I should discuss the movie itself for a little while first. History and background. Apt Pupil was released in 1998 and was met with mixed reviews. The movie had a budget of $14 million and it tanked at the box office, bringing in only $8.9 million. This was the second attempt to make the Apt Pupil movie adaptation, with the first attempt running into financial shortcomings and not one but two actors who were cast in the role of Doosander dying shortly after signing on to the film. Soon after the collapse of the initial attempt to make the film, writer, director, and producer Bryan Singer would have a spec script written up. Singer brought the script to Stephen King, who agreed to allow Singer brought the script to Stephen King, who agreed to allow Singer. Singer brought the script to Stephen King, who agreed to allow Singer to make the film, and he asked only for $1 as payment for the rights. Is it by the book? This film is on point a great deal of the time. For the most part, they only make a few subtle changes to the events, tone, and the nature of the characters themselves. However, there is one major change that I felt was detrimental to the film. Spoilers for the novella and the movie in 3, 2, 1. In the movie, like the novella, we are faced with two main characters that simply cannot be considered protagonists. They can't even be considered anti-heroes, really. Both the young Nazi-obsessed teen Bowden and former Nazi leader Doosander are unlikable bad guys, but the film downplays the villainous nature of Todd Bowden a great deal. In the original story, he develops into a ruthless killer with a body count. He's a very disturbed, hidden in plain sight psychopath. But in the film, the only time Bowden takes a life, it is out of fear and necessity. Instead of embracing his darkest impulses and sprinting all the way down the path of corruption, he becomes more of an unwitting accomplice with a bad attitude than an unfeeling, bloodthirsty killer. And yet we still don't like him in the end. He's still a despicable bad guy playing defense for a Nazi and covering up for him. I don't know, I guess I would have preferred had they made the choice to go all in on the portrayal of the original character and made him an unrepentant monster. However, I imagine they may have reined Bowden in hopes the audience might think he wasn't beyond redemption or rehabilitation at the end of the film. Speaking of rehabilitation, that brings us to the actor who played Todd Bowden, Brad Renfro. Brad Renfro, unlikely child star. In Apt Pupil, Brad Renfro plays the role of Todd Bowden, a young man who becomes obsessed with the tactics and history of the Nazis. Renfro has a certain rough-around-the-edges charm and a demeanor that the majority of his pretty boy contemporaries likely wouldn't have been able to pull off. He is unrefined, and it makes his character and delivery feel genuine, and Renfro was nothing if not that, unrefined and genuine. Unfortunately, however, Brad Renfro's story is reminiscent of a few others we've heard before, and more times than we likely care to recall. A promising young actor rising to stardom seemingly overnight, but in a few short years the Hollywood lifestyle catches up to him and his life and career are ended abruptly. Renfro's childhood backstory paints a picture of a boy who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. He was essentially abandoned by his parents, who divorced when he was very young, and he was consequently raised in poverty by his grandmother. It is believed that Renfro had begun experimenting with drugs as early as the age of 9, with some sources claiming he had shot heroin for the first time at the age of 12. Honestly, I'm not sure if that is accurate information, however, it seems to be plausible. Renfro was discovered by a talent scout working for Joel Schumacher, seemingly entirely by chance. He had no experience or background in acting, but that appealed to Schumacher, who was looking for a rough and tough young man to cast in his 1994 film The Client. Renfro won both a Young Star Award and Young Artist Award for his performance in that film, and he found himself very suddenly thrust into the spotlight. Renfro quickly became a Teen Beat poster boy heartthrob, and following his debut in The Client in 1994, not a year went by that Renfro wasn't starring in a feature film. In the 13 years he was in the business, he was in 25 films, 2 TV shows, and 3 music videos. And while Renfro wasn't necessarily garnering the same critical acclaim across his career that he initially did when he first came on the scene, it's hard to find much in the way of negative criticism of his performances. Following a handful of drug-related arrests and various run-ins with the law, Renfro would pass away in 2008 at the age of 25 due to an accidental overdose of heroin and morphine. Renfro was portrayed as yet another casualty of the Hollywood movie machinery. He was unable to resist the unfettered access to excess the industry is known for. That, combined with his childhood troubles and early exposure to drugs, left Renfro more vulnerable than many of his peers, though he was not the first, nor will he be the last young actor to get carried away by the allure of the rock star celebrity lifestyle. Following Renfro's passing, there were a great many critics who came out to reprimand the film industry for allowing these sorts of things to continually happen to actors and actresses. They claimed there were no safety rails in place and that they encouraged a culture of drug and alcohol abuse. But I'd argue that these sorts of tragedies are hardly exclusive to celebrities, Hollywood stars, and the film industry. Addiction knows no bounds and takes over 100,000 lives every year in the United States alone. In fact, 2020 and 2021 were record-breaking years for drug overdose deaths. Yet it seems as if it's not until addiction claims the life of a celebrity that a light is shown, however briefly, on this issue that devastates so many lives, communities, and families year after year. That's not to say celebrity deaths aren't tragic. Of course they are, but it's astounding how many normal, everyday people die from overdoses and addiction with little to no public outcry, no uproar, no outpouring of grief. It's not that Hollywood has a problem. It's that the United States itself has a problem, and celebrities are no more immune to the destructive force of drug abuse than anyone else. And as you're likely aware, substance abuse isn't the only abuse that Hollywood has a rampant reputation with. Bryan Singer, writer, producer, director, and alleged serial abuser. Just a quick content warning before we continue. This section will contain discussion of sexual abuse. However, I will not be going into any explicit detail surrounding the allegations. In regards to the Apt Pupil film, Bryan Singer once said, quote, "It was about cruelty and the ability to do awful deeds, to live with them and be empowered by them," unquote. And frankly, the same could be said about Singer himself and his track record of sexual abuse and assault allegations that began during the filming of Apt Pupil and continued throughout his career, with allegations as recently as 2019. In 1997, during the filming of Apt Pupil, a young man who was 14 at the time accused Singer of asking him and other minors to strip naked for a shower scene. A civil suit was filed against the filmmaker, alleging infliction of emotional distress, negligence, invasion of privacy, and also that they were filmed for sexual gratification. Reports of what came of this suit are conflicting, with some sources stating the case was dismissed and others claiming it was settled out of court. Regardless, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office declined to press criminal charges. Later in 2014, Singer faced multiple accusations and civil suits, which were either dropped or dismissed. Again, Singer faced allegations in 2017 by someone claiming Singer raped him in 2003. That case was settled out of court for only $150,000, and what Singer's lawyer stated was not an admission of guilt, but rather a matter of business. It was a 2019 article in The Atlantic which appears to have been the final nail in Singer's coffin, however. In the article, 4 more men came forward to claim that Singer had sexually assaulted them when they were underage. In addition to these accusations, further details of the 2017 case were brought to light, which detailed how Singer's legal team reported the accuser to the Internal Revenue Service and the U.S. immigration officials in an effort to stall and undermine the case against Singer. And so Singer has finally found himself banished from the film industry, but it took 2 decades before anyone began to take these allegations against him seriously. And it was 2 investigative journalists that did the work to discredit him rather than a law enforcement agency. And this is yet another Hollywood open secret that has played out time and time again, and only recently have these serial abusers been held to account. The rise of the Me Too movement, the conviction of the likes of Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby, who was unfortunately released due to a technicality. These consequences were a long time coming, and I can't imagine how many of these absolute monsters are still lurking behind cameras and casting couches, preying on the young, the naive, and the vulnerable. However, like the substance abuse issues of the film industry, these sexual abuses are yet another widespread issue that is essentially amplified when it becomes a celebrity news story. I looked at the stats of these sorts of abuses in the United States, and I'm not going to cover them here for the sake of anyone who might be deeply upset by that information. But suffice it to say, the statistics are disturbing and only further prove my point that while the film industry magnifies these issues and puts them under a microscope, there are so many other victims whose stories, trauma, and truth will never see the level of outrage or scrutiny, and in many cases will never be resolved with any semblance of justice or amends, simply because the people it happened to aren't celebrities. And that totally sucks. Final thoughts. Apt Pupil was a film that did justice to the original story and was, in my opinion, a considerably enjoyable adaptation. Despite the fact that the story within the film and of the individuals involved in making it may be hard to digest for some. Also, I would be remiss if I neglected to mention how spellbinding and powerful Sir Ian McKellen is in this movie. He delivers a foreboding, brooding performance, and of course I'd expect nothing less. Also, McKellen is an incredible advocate for the LGBTQ+ community, whose acting career is second only to his activism and charity work. McKellen is a treasure and an absolute legend. I love that man. I'm going to be taking a couple of weeks off for Christmas and New Year's. I'll be back on January 8th with the 5th installment of the Different Seasons series, in which I will be discussing the 3rd novella from Different Seasons, The Body. Thanks to all the great people who have subscribed to the channel, and of course to those who have chatted with me each week in the comments. I hope you all have a safe and happy holiday. Take care, and I'll see you in 2022. Okay. Goodbye. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King, pretty pleased with blood and guts on top. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this has been a great undertaking.